Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. And I got to tell you, I'm excited because whenever we have Leafly on, I'm telling you, we get some of the best information there is out there. And that's the reason why I do this podcast, guys. I do this podcast, Let's Be Blunt with Montel, not just for me. I do this podcast for you. I want to make sure that you get some of the most up-to-date information that you can to help you make good choices when you go out and navigate this daunting cannabis system across this country, where every single state is different, all the dispensaries are different. I want to bring some of the top experts on that always give us good information, and we always get it from Leafly. I'm going to tell you that right now. So if you're looking for any information that you need on cannabis, or you should just become a regular reader, go up on Leafly and get your information, okay? And Leafly's 6th annual Cannabis Jobs Report is out, and it is full of good information for the industry and those who want to be a part of it. The report shows America's cannabis industry sold nearly, get this, $25 billion in products and created more than 100,000 new jobs in 2021. This year's report, created in partnership with Whitney Economics, shows that despite the ongoing economic and employment challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, cannabis continues to be the most powerful job creator in America, with no other industry even coming close. Leafly's senior editor and author of Weed the People, the Future of Marijuana Legislation in America, and Time Magazine's special issue, Marijuana Goes Main Street, is joining me today to review the report. Bruce Barcott, thanks you so much, sir, for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today, sir.
Hey, Montel. It's always a pleasure to join you here. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, you guys always have the cutting edge information. And I'm going to tell you something. This report, I'm going to get into it in a minute. Why don't we start off this way? Before I even start digging into the report, tell me a little bit about yourself. Give me a little bit of your background.
Sure. Montel, have been a journalist for more than 30 years. I worked a lot worked a lot on science articles and environmental articles over the years. Wrote for National Geographic, New York Times Magazine, and places like that. And I ended up, many people have different journeys to the cannabis space, and I just happened to live in Washington State when it was turning legal back in 2012. It was very fascinating to me as a writer. I started taking notes, ended up writing a book that became Weed the People, about legalization and regulated cannabis. And I wanted to continue writing about it. I thought I was very much on the fence to begin with, but after writing the book and doing all the research, I really believed that regulated legalization was the correct way to handle it. So I've been sort of writing about legal cannabis ever since, and the jobs report is one of my favorite parts of the year. It takes us about 3 months to do, and we'll get into the details in a second here.
Sure. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you then. No, and you don't have to say, but
yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your experience with cannabis and when were you first introduced to it?
Well, I was first introduced to it. I mean, like many people in college. Like I was, it was literally. I can tell you my first experience. It was on a spring break at a friend's cabin, and we tried a little in the garage, and I spent a pleasant evening carrying out kind of a cliche of. I actually listened to Dark Side of the Moon with headphones on. Yeah, that's me. That's sorry. That's
well, but I do. But you put a smile on my face and made me laugh when you said you had an experience in the garage, because I got to tell you something. I think my very first experience with cannabis was in a garage.
Right. There's something about
you got to find that place to hide in somebody's house. Let's go in the garage for a minute. What are you going to do in the garage? And I remember it was really funny because I was in a band. And my band used to move around. We could practice at my house for about 4 weeks, and my father would get sick of hearing the noise, send us to somebody else's house, and they get sick of hearing the noise. And it was when we came back from my guitar player Richie's house, and we came back to my house, and I had to set up. We had been practicing in the garage, but I guess I didn't. Unbeknownst to me, my father was getting complaints from some of the neighbors, so they made us go down in the basement. So I'm down in the basement. And I remember, and I was in a band. I was in a band. I was 13 years old. All the other musicians in my band were 16 to 25. Okay.
Mm.
And so I remember the two dudes came in and they were just, I said, what y'all doing? And they were laughing. So they were laughing. And I was like, what you doing? And the one bass player said, come here. We'll take you out of the garage. Come here. I went upstairs. He walks into the garage. I said, what are we going to do in the garage? Go in the garage. He pulls out this thing. He goes, you asked me what's going on. And he holds up this joint. And I was like, let's try that. And my parents were home, so I went ahead and tried it in the garage. It's funny. And you went and listened to who? Who were you
Oh,
listening
Pink Floyd,
to?
like
Dude,
Space Out, right?
I
Yeah.
was a Yes guy. I went right back down,
Ah, yeah,
went
yeah,
down in
yeah.
the basement, and that night, we were trying to learn a Yes song, and I remember I put that song on, and I literally kept playing the record over and over again. I was supposed to have learned it, but instead of learning it, I was just sitting there just cruising. I was like, it was cool.
Yeah.
Anyway,
There's something that whole connection between cannabis and music and time, and the dilation of time, it's a fascinating subject. I mean, it's one of many subjects I love writing about. There's so many places you can go with cannabis and the human experience.
absolutely. That maybe that could be one of your future books to just interview a whole bunch of people about their first experience with
Yeah.
music and cannabis. That'd be great. Now let's jump into this job report a little bit, my friend. This was really fascinating. I mean, the cannabis industry added 107,059 full-time jobs were added in the cannabis industry in 2021, despite the pandemic. I mean, how did that compare to previous years?
It was a little, actually, we were surprised at how many jobs were added. I mean, we've added tens of thousands of jobs in a year in past years, but this was the first year that we added more than 100,000 jobs, and I think that's both speaks to the sort of the popularity of cannabis during the pandemic. We definitely saw a bump in sales last year in 2020, but we expected that to kind of taper off this year, and it really hasn't. And so we're seeing more sales in sort of what I want to say, just larger states, higher population states like Illinois and Michigan, places like that. Florida, even though Florida is only legal for medical patients, there are more than 500,000 medical patients in the state of Florida, and so we're kind of amazed that we saw this much of an increase this year in jobs, and it's only going to continue. I think we're going to see a bigger bump come next year and the year after, with New Jersey and New York coming on with their stores.
Does this include hemp, or are you just looking specifically at cannabis? Or,
Good question. Good question. Yeah. Oh, sorry. This includes only regulated cannabis. Hemp, we're not including hemp, and we're not including uh, sort of the type of CBD products that you'd see at drugstores, pharmacies, that sort of thing. And the reason for that is that the way that we put out the report, the data we use, is only available because cannabis is specifically so highly regulated in each state. And hemp is regulated, but it's a little less regulated than cannabis, in that we kind of have a sense of how many farmers are out there growing hemp, but we don't really have a sense of how many products made from hemp are sold. And
and probably don't have an idea of how many employees those farmers have working just hemp specifically or hemp derivative things, right?
yeah, because it all comes back to licensing. With cannabis in a state like, let's say, Illinois or Michigan, every part of that process, every worker has to be connected to some sort of license, whether it's a growing license or a manufacturing license or a sales license. So that's where we start with those licenses, and then we look into revenue, sales data from every year, and we've come up with a pretty good formula over the years to sort of run figure out how many jobs come out of a certain amount of sales per state.
Well, I mean, if you had to estimate this ballpark or
Mhm.
crystal ball it, what would you say if you combined the legal cannabis, licensed cannabis, and the hemp things together? I mean, would it be double?
I think no, actually, I don't know that it would be double. I've seen recent reports about hemp that put hemp at about something close to a I mean, it may be in the low billions in terms of sales, but cannabis is now a $25 billion a year industry, billion with a B,
Wow.
and that's yeah. We did some comparisons, and you think about milk. You know, milk's in every grocery store. Milk is a $16 billion a year industry. Orange juice is $10 billion. Energy drinks, Red Bull, Monster, that's 20 billion. Cannabis is 25 billion, and it's not really, it's not threatening. Wine and beer are up there in like 75 to 90 billion dollars a year, but it's a significant industry now across America.
You ain't kidding. And I mean, how does that compare when you think about the rocket growth? I mean, let's go back. Okay, this is 2021. I bet if you went back to like 2017 when the industry was burgeoning and really starting to take hold, I would bet that we were probably under $1 billion in sales, right?
I think, gosh, you're asking me to
Sorry.
connect with history, but back in 2017, I think we saw somewhere around 100,000 jobs um, at that time. So we've grown nearly fourfold since then. And we take a look at other jobs, other industries that are considered some of the high growth job creators, things like in the medical field or green energy,
Well,
and they tend to increase at about 10 to 20% or so over a 5 or 10 year span, and cannabis grows at 20 to 30% every year.
wow. And I mean, you hit it on the head, especially when you're thinking about the aging of our population. You would think that the medical field would increase, exponentially, at least
Mhm.
in along with the aging of our society, and with all the issues that we've just had with the pandemic. You would think that the medical community would have dwarfed something like cannabis in growth, but it's the opposite.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were pleasantly surprised by this year, we did a little extra digging into where that growth takes place, and we realized that cannabis is a very labor-intensive industry in specific places. Like when it's sold in retail stores, those retail stores maintain, for the most part, you walk into a retail store in California or Illinois or Michigan or Massachusetts, those stores maintain kind of almost a one-to-one staff to customer relationship. It's not like you're walking to a Home Depot and you wander around, you find a shovel, you find some nails, and then you go and purchase at the checkout counter. When you walk into a cannabis store, often you're almost kind of assigned a specific bud tender who works with you, because you can't just handle the different products and wander around and pick some up and put some down. So it tends to be very labor intensive at the retail side.
And I guess it's labor intensive also at the manufacturing side, the packaging side, every single step along the way, right?
Yeah, and it's because it's state contained. That's how we're able to specifically look at each individual legal state and figure out how many jobs are created there. Because if you're growing cannabis in Massachusetts, it's also going to be packaged in Massachusetts and it's going to be sold in Massachusetts. It's not going to be transported across state lines. So that's one of the sort of tight regulatory aspects of cannabis that actually makes this report possible.
But that also shows every state and every municipality that allows for it that this is an industry that if you welcome it in, it will be a job creator for your community.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, I think that's one of the messages we're trying to get across right now, especially when states like New Jersey and New York are bringing on their retail cannabis system right now, and they're trying to figure out how many licenses to issue, how many stores to open. And right now in New York and New Jersey, they're dealing with a situation where a lot of towns have so-called, opted out of allowing retail stores. And what they're doing there is really not so much, they think that they're keeping cannabis out of their communities. I mean, it's already there. We all know
It's
that.
such a hell, we're
Yeah,
just talking about the non-illicit market.
yeah, exactly. And really, So that opting out is really both tamping down the creation of legitimate tax-paying jobs, and it's also essentially boosting the street market, boosting the unlicensed market. And we're trying to get that message across right now. Yeah.
What are the projections of continued growth in the sector?
We think that there's going to be some strong growth in 2022, maybe not as strong as in 2021. We're looking at maybe 15 to 18% growth in 2022, whereas we saw, 30%, 33% growth in 2021. Partly because I think that the pandemic gave the whole industry a definite boost in the spring and summer of 2020, and that has kind of continued. And we expected it to taper off in 2021, but it didn't taper off so much because, frankly, unfortunately, the virus didn't taper off so much. I mean, we had Delta hit us, and then Omicron. So we think that may slow down a little
That
this year.
instead of it tapering off, I think you're going to see probably almost similar to or pretty close to the same kind of expansion because now you have a bigger audience that finally had an opportunity to say, dang, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. I mean, you got to think about it. There were people who came to cannabis during the pandemic who would have never come to cannabis before this. And now they're there. And now they're literally having the argument at the dinner table. Oh, cannabis isn't that bad. So this may continue to expand. I don't know. Maybe I think is a little off, though I know that the virus is starting to slow down and we're starting to take off some of the social restrictions that we've had with getting together and those kinds of things. I think now that we have a bigger core audience, you're going to see even bigger growth.
I think that's an interesting point, and I think one of the things you're talking about is the continued introduction of or the connecting of people and consumers to different types of cannabis products. I think that for a lot of people who haven't had much experience with cannabis, they assume that it's a substance where either you're sober or you're stoned. You're sober or you're on the couch, binge watching your shows for 6 hours or something. And I think that one of the things the pandemic did do is allow people to venture out and try different products that work for them in different ways. Whether that's just taking a little edge off of their anxiety or helping with insomnia, or helping them work through the day. That's been one of the most surprising assumptions I think that I still encounter with folks who aren't that familiar with cannabis is they think, oh, you're just out there getting stoned. It's like, no, actually, there's a lot of different ways and different products that are out there that people use, that are really helping them get on with their day and live happy lives.
I think also you're starting to see that, and this is something that maybe the industry doesn't really like to talk about as much, but the older generation, I should say, my generation and older,
Hmm.
are starting to say, wait a second, you know what? I don't need to have those 2 glasses of brown liquor
Hmm.
to feel good. And I don't want to wake up with a headache tomorrow morning. This stuff really does kind of make you feel better and relaxes you. And you don't have to worry about being S done. And I mean, the idea that you're saying that I think we maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the idea was that to consume meant to get stoned. Now the idea is to consume is to feel better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something it's generally happening more and more. I think, and honestly, it's people like yourself who are more well known for their acting career or the television career, coming out and saying, yeah, you know what, I use this and I use these different products. And I'm not just going out and getting stoned. I'm finding a place for it in my life that really helps me in a very positive way, and not in a way that I need to hide so much ananymore. That's
Right.
that's uh,
And,
that's that's
and
another part of the thing we're trying to overcome is hiding and beating back the stigma of this.
sure. And I think, I cannot tell you how many more conversations I've had in the last 60 days with people who use the term microdose, or people who use
Hmm.
the term, I don't even get stoned. I just take the edge off. I mean, where you're really having those kind of conversations and not like an argument, but like somebody just offers that information up. Well, I wasn't a cannabis user, but I just noticed that thing. It makes me feel so much better, and I don't have to like be lost. And I'm thinking, 4 or 5 years ago, I remember most people that were consumers said, "Dude, I got the baddest buzz in the world."
Yeah.
I don't get that anymore. I don't hear, "Bitch, I was so stoned." I don't hear that anymore. I hear, "Oh man, I just got the edge off." I mean, now I
Yeah.
kind of figured it out. Those are kind of conversations that people are having.
I agree, and I think that it goes along with the general opening in our society to this idea of mental wellness, and not framing it, framing your mental your mental temperature as just, well, either you have a mental illness or you're fine, right? It's, how you doing. I think the pandemic has really made us stop and think and ask ourselves and our loved ones, really, how are you doing? How are you taking care of yourself? We're becoming more open about, going to therapy or seeing a therapist. Yeah, this person really helps me out. I see him once a month, and we talk about these things, and I think it all dovetails and as part of that conversation, of not, as you say, not getting, stoned or drunk, but rather, how are we helping each other? How are we helping ourselves with these substances?
Absolutely. Now, do you have a breakdown of the types of cannabis jobs and their relative growth? I mean,
We
are there
actually
more?
we looked into that this year, and we're working on that. We may have a more detailed breakdown of that next year. I mean, generally they break down into three general categories of growing and, processing or manufacturing products, and retail side, the retail sales. And retail is usually about, I would say probably 40% of the business, maybe 50%. But our jobs count also includes ancillary jobs, those jobs that are sort of indirect, non-plant touching jobs. Whether that's your human resources specialist, your legal affairs department if you're a larger company. It includes, people in media and information platforms like myself, and so there are all sorts of different jobs that are not within that specific licensing category.
And I guess you would also. I've not heard that the industry is having issues when it comes to trucking and shipping, but is it having any issues in that area?
Not really. I mean, one of the things that is affecting the cannabis industry right now, that's affecting, the job market overall, is and people are becoming a little pickier, a little more conscientious about the jobs they apply for and accept. We're in this era of the great resignation and a great rethinking of how we spend our days and how we draw a paycheck and pay our rent. And I think that cannabis has benefited from that in some ways. I mean, we definitely have seen anecdotal evidence of folks coming from the food service industry into cannabis as a place where they can, use some of those same skills and earn a solid wage, and not have their workplace shut down with every wave of COVID. But we're also hearing reports of employers out there, having to do a little more work to find good employees. As with any industry, it's if you're out there looking for a job in the cannabis industry, this is an excellent time to be looking. And there are great places, especially states like Illinois, Michigan, and Massachusetts, that are still expanding, and especially now in New Jersey and New York, those places have startup companies that are looking for employees with not just cannabis knowledge, but knowledge in whatever specialty, you can think of that has to do with manufacturing or retail. As I said, whether that's in security or legal compliance or things like that, they're looking for good folks.
Wow. And I mean, I guess as we continue to watch the new states come online, especially like New Jersey and New York, I mean, I would think that again, you're going to see 2022 or I'm sorry, yeah,
Mhm.
2022 be a huge boon year for more growth.
Yeah, especially, I mean, with it's not, New Jersey and New York are coming online, and we forget, Connecticut is coming as well, and New Virginia actually might, move up its deadline for allowing retail sales. There's some movement in the state legislature there to maybe start allowing that. So, you know, that whole tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, could become a real hub for the cannabis industry on the East Coast. You know, as obviously, New York is already in the media world, but that could be really a center of cannabis in the U.S.
But when you look at something like this, I mean, again, you're looking at a president who is faced with this, some abysmal, ratings across the board, and he's always trying to tout the job market. This is something that they never say.
Mhm.
But I mean, wouldn't you think that the tide's got to turn a little bit here? It's got to shift a little bit where instead of being on the fence and not acknowledging the value of cannabis, don't you think politicians are going to have to start saying, you know what, I think we've had the wrong outlook on this or something?
We're we're always at Leafly, we're always amazed at the intransigence of politicians who refuse to see how popular legalization is as a political issue, and it's across the aisle. I mean, there are plenty of folks who are Republicans who believe in legalization from a personal rights point of view, and there are plenty of folks, on the Democratic side who believe this as well. But one of the reasons we originally started to issue this report is we believe that this is a count of cannabis jobs because cannabis jobs count. Jobs are a politically very powerful tool and symbol. You think about how powerful a symbol coal mining jobs are in West Virginia, or other jobs, construction jobs, to the economy and how the economy is perceived. And these jobs in the cannabis industry are excellent jobs. They're supporting families across America, and we wanted them to just be recognized for what they were, which was good, solid, honest, legal, tax-paying jobs.
I'm sorry. I know you mentioned it a little earlier, and I forgot which ones were. What are some of the states that cannabis jobs growth is the top states for cannabis job growth?
Well, I mean, California is always sort of number one. They're, if the United States has a $25 billion cannabis industry, California is 20% of that. California is a $5 billion a year industry.
And that's just the legal market. My God,
Yeah, exactly. That's
we
just
and
the
we
legal
think that the
market.
California legal market is probably less than 25% of the market in California, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and but we're seeing a real rise in sales and job numbers in these Midwestern sort of Great Lakes Great Lakes, Midwestern, and East Coast states like Massachusetts, like Michigan, like Illinois, where legalization and retail stores have just started to take hold, but especially there are states like Illinois where sales are taking off, but there still aren't that many stores out there in terms of the population. We have just a handful of stores relative to how many millions of people are in those states, and we're expecting like Illinois to continue with some strong growth because we've got maybe 100, almost 200 new stores coming in the pipeline in the next year or so. So that really could spur some job growth there as well.
Wow. And I mean, what's the most exciting thing out of this report that you've seen?
I think the most exciting thing is the idea that what we hoped with cannabis would happen is happening. In other words, I think we see with states that have good, solid, well-regulated systems like Massachusetts, like Michigan, and hopefully Illinois is getting there. There's a real sort of high slope curve of growth in the first few years. We saw 80% growth in Michigan, 75% growth in Massachusetts. And that will continue. That continues for a few years, but then the market sort of does reach its saturation point where you reach a lot, most of the consumers that are out there. You migrate folks from that illicit, unlicensed market into legal, regulated stores, and that's happening, and almost is done happening in Washington, in Colorado, in Oregon, where the growth there is now in about 2%, 4%, 6% per year, as opposed to 80% and 70%. And that's not, it's not a cause for alarm in terms of slow growth. It's sort of bearing out what we thought was going to happen and hoped would happen, in terms of turning this, formerly clandestine product into something that is normal, that is regulated and lab tested, and people find, the right place, as we said, the right place in their own lives for cannabis.
What do you think? I mean, put your crystal ball on for a second. I mean,
Mhm.
if you were to have to figure out a time, when do you think, in your opinion, would federal legalization kind of catch up? When do you think it might happen based on looking at the industry growth? I mean, let's say we get another 30% growth next year, which I think there's potential for that to happen.
Yeah.
And then you were saying, I think then you might start to see it roll back a little bit, but it won't get out of the 20s for at least another 3 to 4 years. Don't you think that we should be looking at some sort of federal legalization in the next 2 to 3 years? What do you think?
Well, you would think so, and I hope so, but you never know. This is such a deeply ingrained political political conundrum in the United States. Because we've had 80 years of prohibition and 80 years of government, messaging. You can call it messaging, you can call it propaganda, whatever you want to call it. But 80 years of messaging about the supposed harms and evils of cannabis really takes root, in people's minds. And what we have right now is in Congress, at least, which is the body that would need to act to legalize. We have a lot of folks who are, older, who are the elders in our society, and unfortunately, they're the folks who often are the most difficult to reach with the idea that, what we thought we knew 10, 20, 30 years ago about marijuana is not so. We really need to open our minds to change on this. So I'm hoping that we will have legalization in the next, say, 2 to 5 years, but it's always it's a difficult one. I think really what helps is having each state legalize. When each state legalizes, now you've got two U.S. senators who have tens of thousands of constituents with jobs in this cannabis economy. You have a House of Representatives members, and they have constituents and they have jobs as well. And when those people start to speak out and say, "Hey, well, why are you not defending my job when you're defending these other jobs? Or is there something about my job that's less than?" That is a powerful tool, for change.
And well, but and also I think you hit it on the head. I mean, you do have a lot of older representatives who now have to go to cocktail parties and realize that their older friends are stepping out on the balcony. I mean,
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do when Bob, your best friend, says, "Oh, I'm not gonna give you this, senator." What's the senator supposed to say?
Yeah, and I think, with cannabis, I'm sure, you've seen this, and you've been a voice in this. The more unexpected sources of information, about cannabis that reach the ears of those policymakers, those senators, they can really make a difference. It's one thing to have someone you don't know come up and say, "Hey, I enjoy cannabis, and why not legalize it?" It's another to have a person who, let's say, is in a retired, a captain of the local fire department, or, and says, "Hey, you know what? I've used cannabis medically for years for my ailments. I got on the job. It really works." Or, a decorated U.S. military veteran, this sort of thing. It really helps to hear from those folks. I know, when I was voting in Washington State, 8 years ago, and I was on the fence. Hearing from people like yourself, like Rick Steves, the travel guru on TV, hearing from a local fellow who was the former U.S. attorney in Washington State. They were for this, and that made me go, really? That's I didn't expect those folks to be for this change. I will look into this a little bit more.
And I think, what we're starting to see now, though, is the fact that, and I think one of the biggest issues that this industry has faced and is still facing is its lack of education of the consumer. I mean, I think what the cannabis industry's got to do itself a favor and start putting on equal footing the B2B conversations that are having as B2C conversations. The more and more we impress upon the consumer that this is a viable solution or option for them, the consumer will start demanding more. And as they demand more, that means they'll be demanding more jobs. That means they'll be demanding more access. And, I hate to say it, but, as some of my peers leave this place, God bless them, but as they leave this place, I think some of those entrenched attitudes are going to go away.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we try to do every day here at Leafly and have fun doing is answering those questions that you're asking. When we hear that more and more people are turning to cannabis to help manage their anxiety, for instance. We're scrambling as editors and writers to dive into that and ask people, okay, really, how is it helping you? What forms are you taking? What dosages are you taking? Because as we said before, it's been so clandestine, so in hidden away in the garage, for so many years, that the simple act of coming out and saying, here's what I'm using, here's what I'm trying, here's the dosage I'm taking, here's how it works for me. It may not work the same way for you. It probably, everybody's different when it comes to cannabis, but here's what I'm trying. And so just to be able to talk very openly and honestly about things like the difference between smoking cannabis flower versus a vape pen versus a topical or
Edible.
edible, exactly. Being able to do that openly really helps things along. I mean, it really that's not a conversation that happens anywhere else often. I mean, it's a shame that it doesn't, but it's true.
Now, we're looking at employment and employment opportunities here in this space. How does the compensation for employees in this space compare to other industries? Are we starting to see wages go up in the cannabis space?
We are actually. I mean, one of the early cannabis is a great spot for early entry into the job market for folks in their 20s. Obviously, this is a 21 and older product, so you'll need to be 21 at least before applying for a job. But yeah, in those early entry positions. I think the ones that tended to pay in the $11 to $15 an hour range now are bumping up to $13 to $18 an hour or $20 an hour. As we're seeing, again this year with the sort of great labor reckoning, I think those entry level wages are improving. And the thing about cannabis is there is a lot of room for moving on up. There's a lot of room to learn about the industry, learn about the plant, learn about the products, and then take that knowledge and move yourself up the career ladder, whether that's in the same company, in the same state, or I mean, one of the great advantages you have as someone who is in the cannabis industry, has gained some knowledge, you're sort of always a steady, parade of new states coming online, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, where that knowledge all of a sudden is incredibly valuable to people in those states starting up new companies.
And that's some good advice for those who are looking to get started in the industry. But you got any other tips?
I think that, think about what you do well. If you're interested in, looking around and possibly jumping over into the cannabis industry in your state or in another state, think about what you do well already in your job. If you're someone who's not starting out in the job market, but you've been out there working for a while, don't be overwhelmed by the idea that oh, I don't know anything about cannabis. How would I ever get into this industry? we do need plenty of people with great knowledge about cannabis, but we also need people who have great knowledge of how to manage people, how to run a retail store, how to work human resources systems, how to work finance, how to set up a solid security plan, how to work logistics. Cannabis is a very heavy logistics industry, and so if you can move a product from one place to the next with very specific, secure programs, there are people out there who would love to talk with you right now.
Gotcha. Well, anything else you'd like to add, sir?
I think that one of the things that we really just want to come back and emphasize is that this is a report that we put out every year to really emphasize the idea that cannabis jobs count, that these are jobs that are legal. They're doing good for local communities, because they're so state contained. That money really does stay locally within the community, and within the state. And we want to help people who are in the industry hold their heads up proudly and say, "Yeah, I am in cannabis. I'm doing this part in the industry, and it's great." There's nothing to hide or be shameful about. The more we can do that, the more that people will, as we say, that connects then to consumers, to patients coming out and maybe finding the place for cannabis in their lives. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but at least it's an option for them, and I think it's a good option.
Bruce, I can't say thank you enough, sir, for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today. Great information. I hope all of you are happy with it. Remember, Bruce is the Leafly senior editor and co-author of the 6th annual Leafly Jobs Report. Bruce, you always have a home here. You know that. Your staff always has a home here. We like to keep our people informed, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in. Thank you, sir, for being a part of the show today.
Always a pleasure, Montel. Thank you.
You take care. All of you stay well, and make sure you tune into the next Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.